Hi, you're watching a special recording because of IMC Innovating Malaysia Conference 2014, and this was recorded on the sidelines, fresh from the oven, in terms of there were a lot of ideas and thought leadership being discussed at this particular conference. If you remember, I had a pre-conference discussion with Mark Rosario, the CEO of AIM, or Agency Inovasi Malaysia, but today I want to just go back a bit and then come forward in terms of all the expectations that we were discussing before the conference. For example, for me personally, I saw a few areas that were deliberated, not only more deeply, but it's refreshing to see the practical side of what we discussed before. We see CEOs and we see GLCs and we see innovation advocates really talking about key issues that I think Malaysia should be thinking about moving forward on how do we use innovation to better our quality of life. But that's just my understanding of it. Maybe you have a more wider and expansive perspective on the whole matter.
Thank you, Kamarul. Well, we've just concluded our two-day conference, and this is the first time that AIM has organized such a conference in our 3 years of existence. And I must say that we had a very good turnout. The hall was full throughout the 2 days, even this afternoon. Yes. You know, being a Friday afternoon before a long weekend, we were very pleased to see the hall was still full. And the audience were very engaged. And a lot of the questions that they had, you could see that they were very interested to see how should companies go about innovating. And the very theme of our conference, return on innovation. How do you invest in innovation, and how do you measure the returns that you get on it? So we had various perspectives that were offered, you know, from company CEOs, from expert researchers, from academia, as well as from investors. So we gained a lot of interesting insights, and I'd like to say that we're going to put a summary of the proceedings onto our website and the conference website. So I think some of the key learnings were our Malaysian companies in general. Many of them have not really thought about innovation per se as to what are the specific areas that they need to be looking at. Many of our companies do innovate. Yes. And they come up with lots of great ideas, but if we put it into some kind of order and say these are the things that you could be thinking about. And I think it would help the companies a lot to say, okay, maybe I haven't thought about, for example, developing my relationships with my suppliers and customers, because that is one key. When you're developing a new product or service, for example, if you're working with your customer on that's the key to successfully commercializing something new.
That's why I find it, because I was trying to reserve all my attention into one question that I wanted to ask before the conference ended, but because the participating audience was so vibrant in asking, I didn't have the chance. So when the closing keynote address was given by Datuk Sri Idris on the matter, it's a bit ironic in my view, because here was the YB minister who's in charge of the performance delivery unit and management, giving examples of how the government has really taken up innovating processes and how they engage the public and the stakeholders, and how they're pushing implementation right up until the measurement of the KPI and the affirmation of that by the international audit houses, for example. So in a way, if I want to argue it simplistically, the government of Malaysia has taken on innovation, moved it into what they do day to day, and done that more than the private sector. What would you say to that? Because seemingly from last keynote, I have that impression. Some companies are not even looking at those things, for example.
I wouldn't say that. The private sector, in fact, if you look at the exercise that we embarked on, what we call the National Corporate Innovation Index, NCII, we are now moving into our third phase, which is the reason we actually held this conference. In the first two phases, we actually worked with 17 large companies in the first phase. And part of that exercise was actually looking at what these companies had done in the space of innovation. And there were some very interesting innovations coming out from there. You know, there's the ways they actually developed new products and services, even innovating is not necessarily just products and services, even innovating the way
it can be processes.
They work, yeah, the internal processes. You know, we certainly can't say that Malaysian companies are not innovative.
Perception-wise, we don't get to see it. We don't get to know about it. A lot of things happen maybe mostly internally. By the time it comes to consumers in Malaysia, for example, it's already ingrained and embedded into the products and services. And we might assume that that's already there.
Well, partly, but I think also maybe what we need to have are more such companies. You know, the companies we looked at, I mean, some of them are well known, you know, for the innovations that they've had. What we need is to have as many as innovative companies as we can. We've got 600,000 companies. 97% of them are SMEs. If you look at the SME sector in other countries, in Malaysia, our SMEs contribute about 32% to our national income. In developed countries, that figure is more like 40 to 60%. So, and the reason for that is because a lot in some of these countries, the SMEs are the ones that are driving innovation, and they're coming up with all these new things, and that's, you know, the growth rate of those sorts of companies is much faster. So that is what we need to see a lot more of.
The Prime Minister spoke a lot about putting high premium on innovation, you know, and I think maybe if we can see how through NCII, we can see more numbers coming in, not only numbers in terms of quantity, but also the quality of innovation being put across all sectors inside that particular private sector that we have. And maybe one way to do that is to measure it to the current scenario that Malaysia is in. Datuk Seri Idris put out the key numbers and indexes, and when we look at it, of all the GDP numbers and stuff, we're actually at net 9% only on trade that we have. So innovation, I think, is going to be the main differentiator there, because if you want to increase that, so you have to increase trade internationally. That means whatever products and services Malaysia has, which is mostly generated by the private sector, have to matter in the global market. And you can't do that, especially nowadays, if you're not innovative. So I'm going to have to go for the first break, but once we are back, I'm going to give you the chance to maybe make that link between stuff like NCI and how do we make that matter. So that after this short break. Thank you for still watching a special recording done on the sideline of IMC. And Mark, I was just painting the picture of how, to me, the elephant in the room, in the closing for IMC, is when the figures 9% of net trade is being mentioned. And we do know, because a lot of people who are used to watching the discussion on Awani about innovation, I will always compare Malaysia and South Korea. Because in the early 70s, they came down here to learn about, you know, higher industries and stuff like that. But now they are exporting their third generation nuclear reactor technology, beating even Russia and France, selling it to the Middle East, for example. So if we were to look at that, that 9% net rate, to increase that, I think innovation is the way to go.
Yes, you're absolutely right. What that 9% means is that, as the Minister pointed out, is the difference between our imports and our exports.
Yeah.
So the reason that figure is 9%, I mean, apart from all the finished luxury goods that we import, is the imported raw materials and the components that we may be bringing in before we do the value add. So in order for that value add to increase, this is where innovation needs to come in. Take, for example, our LED industry. A big component of cost of the LED is the substrate.
Mm-hmm.
The substrate is imported.
Yes.
So if we are able to come up with new ways of making substrates with locally, that will increase the value add a lot.
Yeah.
And this is where innovation comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So you go into any industry in our manufacturing sector, you will find that if we are able to innovate, we can increase that value add.
Yes. That's why I guess it was very fitting to have somebody from Asia on the second day, because when you look at it, they have to innovate everything. How a plane approaches the airport, for example, the control towers. I always like conferences.
Even whether they should buy their own oil fields.
Yes. So, and we know that they are a good export for the country. This hands down, everybody would say that that's it. But how do we move forward from there? Because sometimes we feel like we need to have big role models for us to be inspired and to follow the path. Because that's why I guess the Zaibatsus of Japan and the big companies that South Korea put out first. So the Samsungs of the world go first, and then the SMEs can follow later. Yeah. So for us, maybe that's also one area that we need to really look at. And then from these 2 days, what are your views on that?
I mean, you heard the minister say as well. One of his last slides was about how we need our Malaysian companies to go overseas. Mm-hmm. And it's really about whether you're going to be. He said, don't keep looking to the government for contracts. Go overseas. Mm-hmm. And I think if we have more and more such companies going overseas and making it big, those are the role models that we'll have. Mm-hmm. And the others, of course, would be success stories coming out from our SMEs that are commercializing something new, mm-hmm. their innovations. Mm-hmm. So, we need to keep looking for those gems. How are we going to... And that's the reason we have those innovation business opportunities. Yeah. Dr. Sri Idris showed those 4 volumes that AIM had been producing. There were 200 IPs that were showcased in those 4 volumes, and we're looking at 400 by the end of this year. Mm-hmm. We are opening this up for companies to come forward and say, hey, I'm really interested to commercialize this particular IP.
So half the job is done already by AIM. Maybe even more than half, because the potential has been identified, verified, and it's been clean, if I can use that word.
I wouldn't call that half the job. It's maybe 10%, because the 90% is really about how you're going to commercialize it.
Discovering opportunities.
Yes.
That part is done.
Right.
That's why I'm trying to say that the cupboard has been rolled open, and you just need to walk on the cupboard. Right? That's basically how I see it, because if you have gone to our research and development institutions, pull out those that you think can make it into commercialization and refine it further from there. What's needed from there is just to bring it forward.
But that's the most difficult part.
Yeah, but that's the best thing, because you've done it. Even if I fail with your first IP that you put up to me, I can just go to the second one and the third one, and find ways to.
Or
make
look
it
at
work.
bringing a few together.
Exactly. Why do you think that's not really happening as fast as you would want it to be right now?
Well, I think first of all is that willingness to take risks. Mm-hmm. If you look at investors, for example, you talk about angel investors. There are very few in this country. There are very few high net worth individuals that have
Okay.
made money from going into these sorts of ventures. The traditional way of making big money is in property development and construction. So if you're able to make a big profit very easily in those sorts of ways, you'd be less willing to invest in startups.
Okay.
So and again, it comes back to having these role models and these success stories. So we need to get some of these success stories out there, and I think we'll find more and more people willing to take those sorts of risks.
Agreed. That's why this discussion is around today. We're always willing to help to bring this out for people to know. I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, I hate to discuss it, but I feel like I have to do it because the funding part of it, and we've listened to the fund managers or manager and that saying that, the end of the day, we look at so many things. And yes, we're going long term, but that might also not be so good for innovation in my point of view, because while innovation take a long term maybe to recoup, but that first initial threshold that you need to get past, like you said, you need to put money into it. And Khazanah Nasional gave example of Iskandar Malaysia. In the first 5 years, it's just about giving billions and billions of ringgit. But now the return of investment is like astronomical. So how do you get past that stage where the balance between giving money back or return of investment to investors, but at the same time convincing them that, you need to swallow this for a certain period of time. But we're very convinced with all the setup and ecosystem that we're doing that you're going to get more than well rewarded by the end of the day. So I guess that's the part that a lot of technopreneurs, for example, are waiting to see what you're going to answer. I'll give you time to think about that. We'll come back after this break. Innovating Malaysia Conference 2014. If you have missed it, this is the sum and the gist of it. And I myself, I've been to a lot of innovation and innovating conferences, but I think the unique one about this one is that the agency behind it is, you pretty much have it mapped out. You have 4 volumes that the minister said is a must read. I will go through it again. I've seen it, but I haven't really looked at it specifically. But what I want to take from there is time and time again, from entrepreneurship to technopreneurship that I've been discussing, it comes back to the seed money, to the first funding, and the technopreneurs will come up to me and still say, yeah, you have this award done with the New Entrepreneur Forum, but that's not going to help us to convince people who have money to back our ideas. So if we don't get out of that perception and mindset, that's going to stop a lot of people with ideas working on those ideas and trying to get it into the first role of commercialization. So how do you see that?
Well, this is the very reason that we started Platcom.
Okay.
Platcom Ventures in Berhad is a new entity that's been set up by AIM in collaboration with SME Corp, which is focused on helping SMEs go all the way from ideation to commercialization, all the different steps along the way. And this involves, depending on at what stage you're at, the ideation could come from the IPs, the innovation business opportunities, those 4 volumes that you referred to, which we're hoping to have 400 IPs by the end of this year. Okay. But it's not just taking those IPs, but even SMEs that have their own IPs or ideas. How do you bring them step by step on that road to commercialization? So we've set up Platcom and we've staffed it with an experienced team that has experience in doing this, not just here but in other countries. And we hope to be able to help as many as we can on this journey. And again, hopefully there will be some success stories coming out from there. And this hand-holding is not just giving advice, but even finding where other help can be available. If it's funding, for example, all the different areas where other government agencies that may be...
It can be measured.
Yeah, may be giving out, helping on funding for startups. So all this will be sort of like a one-stop. You come to Platform and they say, okay, this is where, first of all, what do they have? We would also do like a patent search and make sure that what they have is really unique. And then that would also help to determine, whether it's worth moving forward. Then if there's funding that's required, or if there's some kind of business plan help that's required, that's where the help will come.
I like the discussion part where at one time it went to, if you don't measure it, then you wouldn't be able to quantify it and monitor it, and then it will not get done. But at the same time, sometimes numbers, standard of procedures and conventions, they are the antithesis of ideas, because ideas are intangible in that sense. So I guess AIM sits right there in the middle, looking at funders and people with money, say, hey, we have a nice set of books that we've looked at it and this is a worthwhile investment to make. But on the other hand, you also deal with people with ideas and inventions, and they just have that and they don't want, or they don't know and have the capacity to really measure it and put it down into something that is measurable. So I guess the NCII will go a long way to help give at least a map. It's like, to me, it's like a Waze application.
Toolkit.
Yeah, a toolkit for us to navigate all these things that we're discussing right now. Or do you see it more than that?
Well, I mean, the whole purpose we embarked on the NCII was, first of all, to get companies to look at themselves, look at what they're doing in innovation. It's not so much that we want to rank companies in an innovation index. Ultimately, that's where we want to be. But as a start, what we'd like companies to do is to start looking. We give them all these tools to say, these are the areas that you could be looking at.
Okay.
And it could be different for every company. In different industries, different things would be applicable.
Agreed.
And so, you look at it and see, okay, these are the areas I should be thinking about investing. And a lot of it is intangible. It's not something you see sitting in your assets.
Agreed.
But also, how do you then measure what return you're going to get out of those investments?
Mm-hmm.
And again, those measurements may not necessarily be, profit.
Okay.
It's how, ultimately it is, but of course, it's how it impacts your business.
It can be faster growth.
That's right.
There's never enough time having discussion with you. I guess because that's the thing about innovation. You can never stop discussing it because change is constant. So I guess we have to come to another episode very, very soon for us to continue this discussion. I will not end this. I'm just going to suspend the discussion because I will continue it with Mark whenever he can. Thank you, Mark, for coming
Thank
and
you.
making time for this.
Pleasure
Thanks
being here.
to you for watching. Thank you, AIM, for making this possible. We'll catch you, hopefully, next year, 2015, with the same conference, and let's talk about this again. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thanks.